Let's go live to Liberal MP Tim Wilson. Are you comfortable with the way the raids were carried out this week and the AFP's defence of them?
Oh, well, like everybody, I'm watching with caution, and ultimately the AFP will be held account as they ordinarily are through the parliamentary safeguards we have, particularly around the operation of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. And I'm expecting, and I'm sure the AFP has done this in the full knowledge, that there is going to be a high degree of accountability. So I'm watching carefully, like everybody else is, but I think we need to call out the rubbish that's just been said by Anthony Albanese. Only a few years ago, this bloke was advocating for licensing of the press and controlling of the press. We do have a free press in Australia, but that doesn't change the fact that we have a law which is that sometimes people have access to classified information and classified documents. The revealing or leaking of those documents is a federal crime. It should be a federal crime, and that's the issue at hand.
Well, we've heard from a number of government ministers, including Peter Dutton this morning, and he says it is to protect the national security. How is an investigation into something that happened 10 years ago in Afghanistan impinging on national security in 2019?
Well, firstly, we don't have the full information, which is part of the challenge, so it's difficult to assess the individual components of it. But what we do know is that the documents were classified. People had access to them, have to go through certain security assessments to be able to access them. If somebody is compromising and prepared to compromise those documents, and they're in that level of security and they're in that level of access to information, then that may not be the end of it. They may have other information they wish to release, and this is part of the problem. That's why there is a very serious national security component, not just around this issue, but around the individuals involved and the level of classification of documents. That's why it's so serious.
But do you accept that there is also a place for whistleblowers, Tim Wilson, where whistleblowers are able to provide information to journalists? I mean, that's part of a functioning democracy. It seems to be something that the security apparatus in this country is failing to comprehend, but this is something that most democracies do and do well. We struggle with it.
I don't agree we struggle with it. We have whistleblower protections, which are a component of federal law to deal with when government is committing a crime, and justification where government is engaging in some sort of cover-up. That's a very different proposition from the information that's been presented or leaked here. And so I just don't agree with that.
It's not. It's not at all. It's not at all different, because what we're talking about are allegations of a war crime. I mean, impeaching and encroaching upon having spies spy on Australians. I mean, these are issues of massive public interest, Tim Wilson. Surely
No.
You agree with that?
Now, Kieran, well, all these matters will always be of interest to the public. I'm not disputing that. There is a complete difference between where governments have committed a crime and they're trying to cover it up, and these examples. Now, there was inquiry allegations, and they were being investigated. There are issues. These examples are completely different. I think this is why the technical components of these stories are incredibly important. The process and the means by which they were classified and those who had access to them is incredibly important. I am rabid in my belief in the freedom of the press to be able to report stories and to cover it. That is, and I won't back down from that, no matter whether it's my own government or another one. But it doesn't change the fact that there are laws that are broken, and we don't engage in the enforcement of the law selectively in this country. Not if you want a country that's governed by the rule of law and people respect the rule of law.
Well, you play a role in being a lawmaker. Do you think this law needs to be changed? Because what we saw at the beginning of this week has a chilling effect on future whistleblowers, doesn't it?
Well, no, this is where we come down to what the definition of whistleblower is and the content, the material that can be released and enjoy whistleblower protection.
OK, can I put it to you like this then, Tim Wilson?
Sure.
We've seen a number of stories referred to the AFP, leaks from Cabinet, leaks about, stories about national security, about boats potentially arriving in Australia. Would you feel different today if we saw police raids on a sitting government minister, for example?
Would I feel any different? Fundamentally not if they felt that there was actually a crime that was broken, a law that was broken, there was a crime that would occurred. I don't believe in the unequal application of the law, but we're talking about hypotheticals. So where you see a crime that's broken, the AFP has a responsibility to investigate. If they believe there's a substantive matter, they should be investigated and go through and get access to relevant information. Obviously, they have to deal with that information with caution to make sure that, if it's confidential, it doesn't end up in the public domain. And these are the sorts of assessments the AFP has to go through, and we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to hold them accountable.
Do you think it's appropriate to have a raid of a journalist's, home? She opened the door, thought it was the cleaners. 7 police show up. They raided her bed, the underwear drawer, right through the place. This is Annika Smethurst, of course, our colleague here in the press gallery. Is that sort of action? Is that fair and reasonable?
Again, I don't know specifics of the information that they were seeking, but what is fair and reasonable is that the AFP wants to investigate anyone, any Australian, around having access to confidential documents and where they may have come from or who may have provided them and broken national security laws, that they have to go and they have to get a warrant. And that's what they did, which is the right thing to do. This is how our system works. We have parliamentary oversight. Before police can take action, they have to get a warrant and execute a warrant to be able to go through an investigation, and those matters continue to enjoy parliamentary oversight in the process. So,
it's all
otherwise there'd be no investigation. No, well, it's all lawful. We know that, but that's why we have these steps, and we put in law these steps to constrain the power of police, which means that there has to be some separation of powers and some degree of responsibility held both by the police and by the judicial system to make sure that Australians' freedoms aren't violated.
Do you think there could be a situation where someone in a department, let's say the Defence Department, yes, it's a hypothetical, that, classifies certain documents as top secret to protect themselves from scrutiny? I mean, that's a problem in itself, isn't it?
Well, again, we're talking hypotheticals, but that's why we have protections around if somebody commits a crime or the government's seeking to cover up a crime, then it's a different matter from it just being a document which might be of relevance or of interest. I mean, just about everything that happens in public life or in the Defence Department or any other government agency or any parliamentarian's office is of interest. But we also recognise that governments have to make decisions and consider matters without everything just turning up on the front page of the newspaper. Otherwise, nobody would make any decisions ever. So there can actually be a serious consequence to the operation of our democracy if everything that's deemed of public interest suddenly gets out into the public domain. That's why we have these systems, these processes, this oversight, but critically also the hurdles like that you need a warrant before you can go and investigate or access or compel documents.
Liberal MP Tim Wilson, appreciate that. We'll talk to you soon.